I am Mari Carmen Ramírez. I'm the Wortham Curator of Latin American Art and Director of the International Center for the Arts of the Americas here at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this conversation with the artists and curators of Home So Different, So Appealing, the exhibition that we previewed last night and that will be opening to the general public tomorrow and will be on through February. Home So Different, So Appealing is an exhibition that is the result of a collaborative effort between the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. It is an exhibition that was undertaken in the context of the mega event sponsored by the Getty Foundation called Pacific Standard Time LA. And LA stands for Los Angeles, Latin America. So it's about the dialogue between LA and the rest of Latin America. This is an exhibition that was originally conceived, a project by Chon Noriega, my colleague, who I will introduce in a moment, who's the director of the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center. And he invited Pilar Tompkins Rivas, who's currently the director of the Vincent Price Museum in East LA, and myself to collaborate with him in this project. Now, what is interesting about this collaboration is that originally we did not set out to do an exhibition about home. That was not, what we necessarily set out to do. We wanted to do an exhibition that would bring together for the first time Latin American and Latino artists in the context of this mega event of Pacific Standard Time. Now, these are two categories that the three of us had worked on, Chon and Pilar, particularly with Latino art, and I have, for over 35 years, worked with Latin American art, but also have rather extensive knowledge of Latina art. These are two categories that we felt for a long time that needed to be brought into a closer dialogue. The tendency in the art world, as well as in academia, is to really to pigeonhole things, to pigeonhole artists, to create artificial categories for our understanding of who they are and what their art is all about. So we always have to be referring to them as Latin American or Latina or Chicana or something else. But I believe through our experience of all these years working in these fields, we're also very much aware that there's a lot in common between artists of Latin descent working here in the United States and their counterparts all over Latin America. And so we believe that the next horizon for these fields is to really explore these affinities and these differences. We're obviously talking about very, very broad, very heterogeneous categories, more than 20 countries on one side, and a plethora of communities here in the United States that include Chicanos, Chicanas, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cubans, but now also many artists from Central America, Mexico, and all over Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's a very, very complex field, of study, and I think it's extremely rich as we move further into the 21st century. So we set out to figure out a way to bring together artists from these two very heterogeneous communities in a way that would not pigeonhole them and that we would get away from these very fixed and strict categories. And we decided to start, first of all, looking at the art, as particularly at the art of artists that we consider to be interesting and important. And in the process, we discovered that one of the things that brought together, this many of the artists that we saw, all of which were active during from the 1960s until today, was this idea of home. And it is an idea that is has not strictly been undertaken by Latin American and Latino artists. It is really a universal theme, a universal topic. We have artists from all over the world, Europe, the United States, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, who have really addressed this issue. But we were working within the context of Pacific Standard Time, so, and we felt that this is also a topic that had special resonance for artists in Latin America, because many of these artists have been displaced through immigration, through diaspora, through dictatorships, and through all sorts of other forms of repression or just transatlantic movements. So we discovered in the process that this idea of home was not just an idea that referred to a dwelling or to a house. When we think of home, many times we think of a house, and here in the United States, we tend to think of the house of the American dream. But we discovered that home is a far more complex idea, and that a home can be very many things. To begin with, it's the mother's womb would be the first home. And from the mother's womb, it gets to the individual, and then to the home, the house of the family, to the neighborhood, to the city, all the way to the homeland. So there are many, many different layers to this idea of home. Home can also be, as Daniel was eloquently expressing yesterday, home can also be a smell, or it can be a memory. It could be a chair. It could be, you know, a camping tent, or it could be, in many ways, a system or a network of relationships that we associate with something that is secure and something that we can call home. So it is an extremely rich concept, and certainly a very, very universal concept that, as you can see, was expressed in this exhibition in multifarious ways. The other thing that we did is that we really wanted to bring attention to the works themselves. We did not want to then proceed from an intellectual argument and illustrate it. We wanted to really bring attention to the works themselves and to the works in dialogues. So we looked for a model that could adapt itself to what we were doing, and we decided to use the Constellation Model, which Hector Alea and I had used very successfully since Inverted Utopias, the exhibition that we presented here about the Latin American avant-garde in 2004. And so this model allowed us to organize the artists in thematic groupings, but bringing together artists from different countries, from different generations, and sometimes in opposition to each other. So the exhibition is organized around 6 or 7 of these constellations that include things like model homes, the archaeology of home, mapping home, embodied home, recycled home, home as form, and finally troubled homeland and coming home. So the artisan works are organized around those themes and those constellations. We have over 100 works in the show, as well as about 39 artists who are participating, and they come from countries such as Argentina, Uruguay, Venezuela, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, Puerto Rico, as well as Latino USA. And so what we want to do here now is just engage in a conversation with the artists that we invited to make brief presentations. But also, I want to bring attention to the fact that we have other artists from the exhibition who have joined us today. And I would like to, well, I guess I will go around right now and introduce them, and they perhaps can stand up so that you can identify them. They are Miguel Angel Rojas from Colombia. Is he here? I thought it's okay. Colombia. Okay. Gabriel de la Mora from Mexico. Carmen Argote from LA. She here?
She went home.
Oh, she went. Oh, she went home already. Okay.
Home.
Sorry, she went home. She was very successful stay. Okay. Miguel
I'm
Angel.
gonna go home and she took it literally.
Yeah, both. Miguel Angel Rios, is he here? From Argentina, Mexico? No?
No.
Okay.
Home.
Okay. Okay. Am I missing someone?
No, that's everybody.
Joanna Calle. Joanna, is she here? Don't see her.
No.
Okay, well, Joanna Calle from Colombia is here. She may join us in a little bit. So before I go on to introduce the artists up here, I would like to introduce my colleague, Chon Noriega, whom I said was the person who came up with the idea for this exhibition in the context of PST, and who also invited Pilar Tompkins and myself to be part of the project. Chon Noriega is the director of the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center, and he's an adjunct curator at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. He has also curated numerous film programs and art exhibitions, including to begin with, including Revelaciones in 1993, which was held at the Johnson Museum at Cornell University. He's also the curator of the very successful and very written up exhibition, Phantom Sightings, Art After the Chicano Movement, 2008-2010, which also took place at LACMA. At the UCLA Chicano Studies Center, Chon oversees some of the most comprehensive archives on Chicano art, as well as a very extensive and expansive publication program, an academic press that includes also the AVER series, which is a series of monographs on Latino and Latina artists, which has been, in many cases, some of the first monographs that have been written about very important artists in this field. He also oversees research projects across disciplines that include education, public security, as well as health, and of course, the visual arts. Chon received his Bachelor of Arts degree in English from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and his MA and PhD in Modern Thought and Literature from Stanford University. So, Chon, would you like to make some more comments about our curatorial framework?
Thank you. That was, that was very nice. A little exhausted listening to that. At best, I think I would echo what Mari Carmen has been saying, and to just emphasize that, you know, if you've seen the show or when you see the show, that we put about 5 years of research, planning, and kind of speculating until we on the configuration of the show. The first step was to really, once we had our idea, was to get a sense of where do we take this. There's so many things you could say about home. We didn't want to be comprehensive. We really reject the idea, in most instances, of the survey. And so we went back to the works that were really compelling to us and went through them in a very iterative way and began to, from those works, identify what seemed to be categories that we could follow up on. And then went back to the artists that we had been looking at over the previous 2 years and began to build that. Throughout, it was less a question of finding 100 very unique works, which I think we have up there, but to find works that really were demanding to talk to their peers across decades, across countries, and across media. And that there was a conversation that was not being allowed to happen that we could help facilitate. When you see the thematic sections, no work only belongs to that section, in the same way that no person only belongs to one social category. So we really were giving those as a way of just saying, among the works that we're presenting, here's a group of works that we feel really can engage a dialogue around this topic, but they could do others. One of the great things about the installation here at Houston, at LACMA we had 13 galleries, and we had 8 thematic sections.
You can see in some of the slides.
Yeah, and here we have, I think, 5.5 galleries, and we have 8 categories. So a number of the galleries actually have two thematic sections, and it really challenged us to not blend them together, but to find where they overlap, and to find where we could force, in a kind of almost like an Abby Warburg way, force a set of connections or dialogues that may not be apparent at first glance. And I think, just to wrap up, to my mind, the enduring aspect of this was the value of sustained, repeated engagement with the artwork. And that I think part of, if we have any success in terms of the structuring of the show and the installation, it is that we spent years playing with the work, going back and forth, seeing the works in person, thinking about how they could be configured relative to each other. We in some ways completely broke the model that LACMA uses, which is the white cube where every work gets its own space, it's separate from the next work, and you lose the dialogue that can take place in that room because you've been encouraged to take things one at a time, which is not how we live. So I think that has been really, part of what was really a challenge to us, and it really took that time. So we're very fortunate that we had the initial support from the Getty Foundation to do that. Personally, I'll end by saying that I first experienced this museum back in 2004 when I realized, holy, and then a word, I'm going to miss this show. This is not just a once-in-a-lifetime. This is a once-in-a-century phenomenon of bringing such a stunning array of work of all scales and media. And I'd better get there. And so I flew out here and spent the weekend and went through the show several times. And I knew Mari Carmen, but that show really stands out as really a kind of a phenomenal intervention in not just the presentation of Latin American art, but of the contemporary art of the period that it is covering. And I came away from there with the sense that I really hope I get to install a show in the Brown galleries at some point. Because the other thing I came away with is like, this is a museum for contemporary, that really holds contemporary art in a way that only Texas could conceive of, that you've got this massive open gallery, and then you go to the upper gallery, which is even bigger, and you're looking down on it, and the things that you can do. And I love that we have that video, Miguel Angel Rojas's video, where you can, the best vantage point is from the far end of the lower gallery, in terms of the visual impact of it. So this has really been a thrill, and it's been so exciting between both shows, seeing groups of artists that may never otherwise come together. I noticed that they've segregated in seating. We got the Chicanos on one side and Americans on another. Of course it happened naturally. Yeah. Well, yes, we'll be pushing your chair further over, Daniel. If you don't get the joke now, you will by the end of the panel. So where do we go next?
I'm going to introduce that. Okay. So, thank you. I think one of the interesting things, and I guess this happens with every thematic exhibition, and I'm sure the artists have, comments and reactions about this, and I hope that they will express them, because it can be a conversation between artists and curators, and then all of you. But I think one of the interesting things that I've, at least in talking to some of the artists that I know better, we chose them to be in this exhibition because we read in their work that, it was very much related to home, or it was explicitly related to home. But some of them had never really thought about their work in relation to home. And so there's one particular case that is not here with us today, but he and I did a conversation in LA at the opening of Pacific Standard Time, and that's Guillermo Quicker from Argentina. And being in this exhibition really stimulated a reflection on the part of Guillermo. You can see the conversation, we put it up in the website. And he ended up, really talking about how home had been so influential throughout his entire career. And he had never really thought about it in those terms. But right, and including the fact that now, he started, doing painting, and then evolved into, the beds that we have in the exhibition, and now he's actually painting directly on the walls of his home. I mean, he was doing that even before we chose him for the exhibition, but there's a progression there, and he called it coming home. So, that led us to ask the artists that we have here up here with us today to think and to talk to us a little bit about how their work relates to home and how they see their relationship to this exhibition. So they're going to be doing some brief presentations. I will be introducing each one of them, and then we will open up a discussion and then eventually with all of you. So I'm going to start with Amalia Mesa-Bains, who is an artist, an educator, and community advocate. I would say she's more than that. She's an icon, of the Latina movement. She received a PhD in psychology from the Wright Institute in Berkeley in 1983. In the course of her cross-disciplinary career, she has worked to define a Chicano and Latino aesthetic in the US and Latin America. As an artist, her primary focus is on interpretations of traditional Chicano altars, community practices, and history. Her works have been exhibited in both national and international venues, including the National Museum of American Art at the Smithsonian, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museo del Barrio in New York, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Amalia?
Unlike Quicker, I would say that most of my work, beginning in the early years of the 70s, 80s, has been defined by the home. So what you're looking at now is a piece known as the Ofrenda for Dolores del Rio, which belongs to the Smithsonian. And when I began, I was recruited, like many Chicanos of my founding generation, to in some way express and affirm the traditions. So the home in my undertaking was the home as an altar space. It was a place of domestic narration and to some degree a questioning of patriarchy. And I've written to some degree in that respect. What you're looking at now is the border piece. And that one was when I began to look at displacement and loss, the whole idea of deterritorialization and what happens to people as they are forced from one space to another. And I want to make it really clear that as Chicanos, we are really internal colonials, having had ancestors living in this continent for millennia. So we really, in some instances, didn't come from anywhere. Many of my friends go back multiple generations in the United States. So the border then becomes not just about loss and displacement, but about origin and meaning. I also began to work in the area of domestic identity, and that had to do with the idea of my own life. So I did an autotopography that's called Venus Envy. This is the first chapter, the Holy Communion Moments Before the End. So it's really a piece not just about the role of religiosity and domination within the Chicano community, but it's also about belonging, about family, about women, and about ceremony. In the time that I did these works, I began to experiment with changing the altar form to a vanity and a vanity to a room, and I began to move into what I considered sacred rooms. In respect to that, I was also interested in the rooms of women. So this is the room, or my library, of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Many of you may know of her. She's a 17th century nun who was a child prodigy, very brilliant, who died quite young, wrote a very important piece called La Respuesta, which is considered by feminists as a sort of first treatise on feminism in the New World. Her world, for me, was an inspiration in the years in which I was working on my doctorate. And so, to some degree, the creation of these spaces, for me, has been an exploration of my own life. And I have discovered that within those spaces of the domestic, there is tension, there is a kind of fugitive quality, and that's why I liked ephemeral work for so many years. What you're looking at now is the piece that is in the home show. And so by that time, I began to look at the idea of not just home as the domestic space of family and belonging, but land as home. And Bell Hooks writes it better than anyone, as she does many things. And she writes about something called home place. And when she speaks of home place, she speaks of those locations in which we come together in a struggle, and which we feel safe, in which we are able to recover from the wounds of domination, racism, and sexism. And so for me, it began to be a question not just of my original interest in altars as spaces of spirituality, but of land itself and the memory that land holds as an act of spirituality. So in looking at the home that I've developed in Transparent Migrations, I was looking at the origin of Mesoamerican life and to some degree Aztlán itself. And so that is why I chose the maguey as a sign of endurance, resilience, and I chose the strategies of luminosity and transparency and reflection as a way to come to the spiritual space. This is a detail of it. There's a small dress that hangs in it, and it's a kind of personal relationship I have with Frida Kahlo, who have made work about and written about for over 30 years. And this is my version, and my dress hangs here. Those of you who know her paintings will know that piece. And the mantilla, that is the scarf, is my wedding veil, my wedding mantilla. So it's 51 years old. So that little space for me is also a very private space, both of remembrance and of love. And I want to say that throughout the time that I developed these pieces around land and home place, I was really looking at the space that I consider to be the space of memory. And for many years we battled as Chicanos to have our work exhibited, but we didn't always want to be exhibited in large collections of ethnicity, but more through the intervention of themes and tropes and ideas about what means something. So memory is the bridge between the living and the dead, between the past and the present. And memory is what sustains us often in times when other things are not available to us. So the home to me has many meanings, and I share with my friends on the panel here, I hope, a deeper explanation of what that can mean. Thank you.
Thank you, Amalia. I'm now going to introduce Daniel Joseph Martinez, who's a native of Los Angeles and earned a BFA degree from the California Institute of the Arts in Los Angeles in 1979 and pursued independent post-undergraduate study with German artist Klaus Rinke. Martinez has participated in various individual and group exhibitions, and his works are part of national and international art institutions, including the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and LACMA. I think Daniel is an artist who characterizes his practice as being eclectic in the sense that he will never repeat himself, that he is a conceptual artist that works in whatever media is important to him or useful to him to convey his message. And he has been, among other things, a pioneer in the use of animatrons, in his work. Borrowing and working with specialists in Hollywood, special effects specialists, and I'm very proud to say that the Museum of Fine Arts Houston owns the first of those pieces by Daniel. So we go back quite some time. I believe Gilbert Vicario is here, who was instrumental in, in bringing that work to the museum and helping us acquire it. So, Daniel.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming, and lovely to have all of you be on the panel with you all. Perhaps what I would like to do is just for a brief moment is just step back in context and perhaps juxtapose what this exhibition is against where we are today. And it would seem self-evident to me, but perhaps not in the times that we live, but we seem to have arrived at a place of sort of moral and ethical vacuum. One, at such a level that daily depravity of unprecedented sort of levels is shocking every day. Every single day, there is something else that not only breaks with the civil society that has kept us together, but it breaks with almost everything that we have ever been taught as by which to coexist in a society. And there's something that is disturbing about the sort of hermetic nature of what we do as artists within an industry. I even hesitate to even suggest calling it that, but that is what it's become. But it seems that we have traded our humanity for the pursuit of money. And we have done this at every single level and every single possible manifestation. Perfect example of this is yesterday, $450 million, almost $500 million for a Da Vinci. It's almost extraordinary. And then the photograph the day before that of Munchkin and his wife holding up a sheet of $1 bills from the engraving, the place where they engraved the money, because he has his signature on the money. These are not disassociated. These are directly connected. The sort of the exhibition of wealth and the sort of power of wealth by which to accumulate art. And it's something that we need to examine and something we need to think about. And it's hard to negotiate this in the world we live, because how do we direct ourselves? What is the content? What is the questions that we need to ask? And how do we make the work that is attempting to not answer the questions, but perhaps ask more questions about that? And I would argue that this exhibition and the way it has been put together is beginning to do that. I would suggest that this exhibition raises the specter of criticality. This is very important. It's not that criticality can be accepted wholesalely in the sense that we would, those of us that don't see ourselves as intellectuals or see ourselves as actively contributing to the society. The question is that criticality has now also been tossed out. So criticality is not something you can just sort of assume exists in our world, but we actually have to work to develop a critical space by which to examine who we are in the world contemporarily, because we are losing right now. On every level, on every front, we are losing. And if we lose any longer, this country will not be able to be put together again, perhaps for 3 or 4 generations, if ever put together the way we might imagine that it could be. So this exhibition is based on criticality, and I think what it does uniquely is it assembles a group of artists intergenerationally and from different countries across the Americas and puts them in one place at one time to focus specifically on this. And most of these works in this show, even though each artist would probably describe them differently, the works themselves take critical stances on issues that are relevant to us today and contemporarily. And they speak across lines. They speak across gender lines, they speak across ethnic lines, and they speak across sexuality. They start to speak in a way that is what we expect, what we should expect art to do. Art should make us uncomfortable. Art should put us in a position where we need to think about what artists are saying, because if artists cannot ask these questions, who is going to ask them? If artists are perhaps the last line of defense that we have, poets, artists, intellectuals, to try to hold together a society that has completely fallen apart. It is degraded beyond any ability to recognize it. What does that mean to us contemporarily? Why do we look at art? Why do we read poetry? Why do we read it at all when we are deprived of education, when we are almost deprived of everything that has made us human beings? So this exhibition, I think, does this uniquely, and it does it in a way that, as many people up here that have known me, I categorically reject the categories. Yeah. So as Amalia is speaking, I'm reminded, because we have known each other for quite a long time, I'm the generation after her, and I might be single, as a lone individual in this particular opinion, but I have never found myself comfortable in any of the categories. I am not Chicano, and I am not Mexican American, and I am not Latino, and I'm not Hispanic. I'm just an American artist, and I happen to be of Mexican descent. I absolutely refuse, and only Chon has been able to twist my arm over the years to somehow, I don't know how this happens, but somehow, you know, somehow it sort of works its way out. But it's important that my generation almost rejected everything that came before because we were looking for something else. We were looking for an intellectual place. We were looking for a space that allowed for the possibility of the unknown to exist. We were looking for things that allowed us to be able to be artists that could operate within a discourse that was international. We no longer wanted to be confined to a city or to a state or to a group of people or even to a country. We wanted to have the ability to move freely everywhere we went and move freely with ideas and investigate the unknown. And in investigating the unknown, we wanted to then possibly generate an entirely new genre of production of art. And this is what we believe was what was one time called the avant-garde. That is not gone. But it's only gone because we have compressed art to only being valuable by how much it sells for and how popular you are. Can you imagine that the ideas in art are evaluated by popularity and value, which absolutely mean nothing in the evaluation of an idea? Nothing. It's ridiculous that we would even assume to do that. Auction houses, really? Galleries, art fairs, are the determination of what a value of an artist is? I think not. You know? So anyway, I know we don't have not much time, but so I have two works in the exhibition. Chon and Mari Carmen and Pilar, they...
The two biggest works.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, how did you manage that?
They're, just for a brief description, they're bookend on the show. It's the opening work, and it's the end work. And I think that they strategically place them that because they open a conversation and then close a conversation in relation to the discourse that has been generated by the curators. And I think Mari Carmen is correct when she was talking about, talking to Cuenca, that sometimes what curators do is they allow us as artists to rethink what we do. And by creating a category, and by creating a genre by which other artists and other works function in tandem where they are bouncing ideas off each other, we then reconsider that what we're doing. Artists, we know exactly what we're doing, and we do not know at all what we're doing at the same time. So we can precisely describe what we do, but it takes time. That's why it takes a lifetime to make work. It takes a lifetime to pursue being an artist. Nonetheless, the two works, one is dealing with domestic terrorism. It deals with the Unabomber and Martha Stewart and Gordon Matter Clark together all at the same time. And the other work deals with actually an experiment that happened in the 1940s with architecture. It was an experiment that happened both in Irvine, California, here in Houston, and in Washington, D.C. The very first templated, formatted houses that would be used for the suburbs, in other words, planned housing. This experiment then launched itself across the entire world and was picked up and militarized by the Israelis, by a way to commandeer property from the Palestinians. But both works are critical, and both works are attempting to examine a social political milieu that allows us to rethink, again, who we might be and who we are contemporarily. So we'll leave it at that.
I'd just like to say that when Daniel was in the first show that I did, Revelations, in '93 at Cornell, it led to the takeover of the university. You were part of this, but that had to do with the fact that there were students that rejected the racist graffiti that was appearing on his work. So.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.
I will now go on to introduce the Grupo Mondongo. That was formed in 1999. The Buenos Aires-based collective Grupo Mondongo consists of artists Manuel Bendaña and Juliana Lafitte. Typically working in series, the artists experiment with various media using string, cookies, meat, and particularly plasticine or clay to paint. They consider the work, even though it's made with plasticine and clay, they consider it really paintings. And even though it has relief, I mean, it's not just a two-dimensional surface. And the work in the exhibition, as you will see, it's a polyptic, so it is really a three-dimensional object. But still, they consider themselves to be painters. And Grupo Mondongo's works have been exhibited at Museo de Arte Latinoamericano de Buenos Aires, the Centro Cultural Recoleta, Centro Atlántico de Arte Moderno in the Canary Islands, the Museo de Arte Moderno de Buenos Aires, as well as here at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, where they have been included in several exhibitions, and they're also part of our collection. The works have been collected extensively in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. Manuel and Juliana.
Hello, thank you for coming. Well, our English is not good. I think it's bad. Then we have something to read because we think it's better. Sorry. Well, we are going to talk about our altar pieces. In 2011, we decided to undertake a series of work under the premise of rescuing a forgotten format of the history of painting, the altar pieces. This series operates as a reflection of our urban way of living, thought from a perspective near the science fiction presented with a shape inspired in religious propaganda. Man is now an urban creature, and the cities have become the focus of new forms of living and new forms of social disorder. All too often, the contemporary city is a sick organism in a state of continuous transmutation. As a result, the fluid fragmentation of the metropolis has become a key point for analysis, in the sense that the structural beliefs that underlie civic order are collapsing, and the metropolis continues to fragment more and more into new but unexplored spaces, or into spaces that are only partially articulated, but at the same time tremendously fluid and changing that form and break only to reform again in different ways. These are spaces in which the fixed points of reference have disappeared. All of these cities suffer belts of poverty that spread out cancerously at their edges or turn into large sections within the metropolitan space into no-go areas. The problems of the global cities, the megalopolis, now closer to each other, is that they are the different regions that make up their own countries. The technological and urban changes occur in conjunction with a new group of codes established in order to define the degree of attachment to place. Everyday culture is on the rise as a result of a combination of signs and concepts drawn from the local, the global, and the symbolic field in which cultural identities are formed. Culture is a mixture of hybrid and global symbols. We now have what some critics call the deterritorialization of symbols. We now have what some of contemporary culture structured by semi-chaotic and turbulent forces, by models of unequal cultural exchange. This is the last of our series of altar pieces. In our effort of bringing into contemporaneity of revitalize the task of painting, we set out to establish a dialogue using materials like plasticine, among others, with Ghent altar piece or The Adoration of the Mystic Lamp by the brothers Van Eyck, which is presumably the first oil painting in art history. This format that served to spread Christianity and that put a variety of topics into play gave a choral vision of the concepts of creed that governed life during that period of history. Moreover, the piece is a daguerreotype image of the city of Ghent, where the brothers Van Eyck lived. Within this process, we respected the framing and formats of the altar piece and subverted the contents, bringing it to what we saw in our environment, the concepts that govern today's history of humanity, following a detail of each section.
I think that you read very well and you continue reading.
Sorry, this is our thoughts. We wrote it.
Well, between the upper and the lower section, we see a clear division between the city of God and the city of humans, described by Saint Augustine. In the upper section, in the upper section is dedicated to the celestial world, with the presence of Adam and Eve, God, Mary, and Saint John the Baptist. In our case, we replaced the outdoor religious iconography for a graphic of the stock exchange S&P 500 Standard & Poor's chart candlestick that reflects the stock market movement of the 500 most important companies listed in New York Stock Exchange from 2000 and 2015. That's because we have a real great crisis in our country in 2001, and after that, our country continued to produce food to feed 2,000 million people, and we have the third part of our population under the line of poverty. Continue. In the lower section of Game Politic, we can see the landscape where the main scene appears the adoration of the mystic lamb, which represents God's sons and the Eucharistic. The composition is based in an expert of Sam Shon Apocalypse. After this, I saw a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues, and standing before the throne and the sight of the Lamb, clothed with the white robes and the palms in their hands. Before the mystic lamb, the spring of life, from which the stream arises, covered the jewels. On the horizon, buildings and churches surrounded by a lush vegetation typical of the European landscape. In the lower part, we represent a landscape of the Villa 31, one of the most emblematic slums of our country, given its location and excessive growth. It is quite astonishing to pass periodically through the 25 de Mayo highway that enters into the center of the town and watch how it grows in extensions and height. Our perspective was beyond horizon and reaching the Ciudad de Dios, City of God, a construction in the making, a formwork of wood and concrete that scraped the stock market chart. This is the landscape usually observed by people working in the financial neighborhood of Buenos Aires. A good metaphor of parallel worlds living together is to go through the view of the Villa 31, to park 10 blocks after and assist to the opera and at the Colón Theater of the Fura del Baus or the Scala de Milan Theater, in the Colón Theater. Once we established the landscape, we started to populate it with the scenes and representations, sometimes descriptive of reality. For example, a trash picker showing his heavy cart full of cellulose waste, other times allegorical, like the man in the bathroom looking at his cell phone. We try to show the accumulation of wishes who live huddled together, trying to make a living very close to the rich part of the metropolis. In the place of the spring of life, we put a black hole with a tar, with an endless amount of spermatozoids falling inside. In the horizon of this part of the slang, we see the skyline of Buenos Aires with important buildings like the Four Seasons Hotel or Rulero. This is a key situation within the painting because when it is closed, in the central panel of the Polyptych, you can see the opposite view of the Villa 31 and the River Plate. When it's closed in the Ghent altar pieces, in the upper part, there are 4 figures that predicted the coming of Jesus. 2 of them belong to the pagan tradition, the other 2 to the biblical tradition. The prophetesses are on the top of the room. To the sides, on the lunette, the prophetess Zacharias and Micah, both authors of the prophetic books of the Old Testament. On these 4 lunettes, we replace the prophetesses for our daughter with her cat and her digital oracle to the world, her iPad. To the sides, in the place of the prophets, we put portraits of 2 French writers who accompanied us in our process of thought and who have already abandoned this era. Kevin Power and Enrique Fowell is a great writer from Argentina. In the central section of the Polyptych of the Ghent, in the central part, they show the episode of the Annunciation. To the left, Gabriel the Archangel, and to the right, the Virgin Mary. The space is represented on the 4 boards in the same room, with the only vanishing point. The Virgin and the Archangel are located in a virtuous interior, where through the window we can see the life of Ghent in the 15th century. It is a representation of the Annunciation in a domestic space of that period. On the central part, we made a representation of ourselves reading and meditating. To the left, it's me reading a book of Eva Perón, used during the first Peronista government to teach to read and write on primary school with Eva Perón as a main character. To the right is Juliana listening or meditating with a surly expression. If you get closer, you can see that half of her right arm is a robotic one. You don't know if she's turning into a robot or she is, on the contrary, coming back to humanity. In the lower section of the Ghent polyptych, on the interior boards, the patrons who committed the altarpiece to the left, Jos Bede, and all the persons that committed the work, we replaced that by, we represented the four boards, the same environment. Again, with an only vanishing point, it is the basement of our studio, the way it looked when we finished the altarpiece. To the left, a portrait of Sergio Delof, friend and key artist and agitator of the Buenos Aires underground scene of the 90s. He incarnates the figure of the damned artist, full of talent and inspiration, but consumed by self-destruction and undervalued and forgotten by the intelligentsia. On the center, we see the altarpiece open on an intermediate stage of work, generating a situation of infinity. To the right, a huge puppet in the making, a sort of window into our future work. Well, this is an explanation of what we tried to do with the altarpiece series, because this series was always based on trying to figure out how we live today in our cities, in our environment. And that's it.
And now it's a pleasure to introduce Abraham Cruzvillegas, who just joined us, literally from Mexico City. And Abraham is among the most important conceptual artists of his generation in Mexico. He studied at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, the UNAM, and has been awarded a number of residencies, including at DAD in 2010, the Smithsonian Institution in 2008, and Atelier Calder in 2005. His works have been featured in both national and international venues, including the Bienal de Sao Paulo in 2002, the 50th Biennale de Venezia in Venice in 2003, New Museum in 2007, the Museum of Modern Art in Oxford in 2011, Tate Modern in 2012, the Walker Art Center in 2013, and Haus der Kunst in 2014. Cruzvillegas lives and works in Mexico City.
Thank you. I like very much what Daniel said about like referring to identity in about something that is absolutely unstable and unknown and definitely unfinished. That's the way I think of mine, at least. So I'm not Latino. I'm not Chicano. I'm not Hispanic. I think I'm not Mexican even. I think I'm just a person, maybe, and I hope, I mean. And in my case, I think everything started with arrogance, as I went to study pedagogy, education. I mean, like I have a degree in education at the National University, because I thought like art schools in Mexico were really bad. I mean, I think they're still really bad. And then I wanted to do something for transforming art education, so I went to study that. And there I met one of my best friends in life. Can we start with the slideshow, sorry? And how? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, thank you, that's me. So then I met this guy whose name is Angel Lopez. We were studying education there, and then at a certain point, I think in 1990, he told us, we were drinking lots of beer in a friend's house, and he told me, I have a friend in the US, we have to visit him. And we said, okay, let's go. And then we went to visit him from the party. I mean, we just left and took the train to Laredo, and then the Greyhound from Laredo to New York. And we arrived in Great Neck, New York, to stay in his brother's place. And we understood that was home for Ruben, his brother. And then we just got a little job in Manhattan in a gallery, cleaning and hanging photographs by Imogen Cunningham. It was portraits of Frida Kahlo's. And then it was Carla Stelveg's gallery because of a recommendation of a friend. And then we were just working there like for a couple of weeks. There we met a young student whose name is Ana Indich. And my friend Angel went very well with her, along with her, and they got married some years after it. So New York and Manhattan became home for my friend Angel. His nickname is El Tornillo, the screw. I don't know why. And whatever. But then, it was just then that I started thinking of what was home for me in the late 80s, early 90s. And I started thinking on something that's been there for forever in my soul, in my education, about the way I grew up in Mexico City, working with my family, constructing a house for ourselves without any idea of architecture, and so collaborating with neighbors and with relatives every weekend, doing things with no skill, without no knowledge, without no language, no architecture, no budget, no design, nothing. I mean, the idea of the favela or the idea of anything like that was not in our language. It was just our everyday life. Then this became kind of the prime matter for many of my works. I presented everywhere in galleries and museums and so. But I also made different approaches to this kind of experience that is not, again, not related at all to do it yourself as a weekend hobby, but it's more like a political and economical circumstance in which you have to do things with nothing. In a country in which, and I like again very much what Daniel said, my country is a country in which corruption, violence, intolerance, authoritarianism is home. That's home for me. The name of my country is not whatever you're thinking, but it's violence and corruption and intolerance and authoritarianism. That's the way I grew up. In that context in which we were making our own houses, women, children, we got some kind of awareness, kind of a consciousness on what is ours, what is home again, what belongs to us. And it was volcanic rockland, so it was not properly land, it was not soil, it was just rocks. And that's what we had. That was the only thing we had. And then we made our houses that way. This is fun. This is the way I grew up. This is the early pictures of my neighborhood. I mean, if you can call this a neighborhood. But the funny thing of this, if you pay attention in the lower right side of these images, that these are images taken by the police, the intelligence. So yeah, so they were there watching this process of transformation of citizens and housewives into activists. My mother, like many other women, they were in their 20s or 30s maybe, they became very politicized and very active as agents for transformation in our neighborhood and our community. So I grew up in demonstrations and in, you know, like all these kind of activities that are not necessarily just constructing. It's not a physical activity, it's not just the act of constructing a house, but the act of becoming part of becoming a community, belonging. And this is the real prime matter of my work, not the shapes of the houses. It's not just an aesthetic approach to the way we made the houses, but to the process of becoming a community. And we had to fight for water, I mean, getting proper services, like having a street, that's something you can call a street, water and education, like schools, market, and so on. This, of course, is not something that happened only there. in my neighborhood, but it's human. It happens everywhere. We have different names that you, of course, know, like, again, favelas and Villa Miseria, shanty town, slum. So, exactly. I mean, this is something that belongs to all of us, different ways, because something that is maybe unfair distribution of wealth, you know? And this happens everywhere. So I think this is the main part of my work, and how things arrive to take a shape in space that you can call art. Can we see the video, please? I made, in my gallery, it's a commercial gallery in Mexico City, Curimansuto, they gave me carte blanche to make a project in the gallery. It was kind of new, the space. And I decided to make a play, a theater play, with actors and musicians playing live, in which there was kind of my intention to show the process of transformation of the community. Like, again, women or housewives becoming activists. My father, who was an immigrant from the countryside, becoming a professor of the university, and youngsters becoming guerrilla guys, and kids like me becoming artists. So this is it. And what we have now in this exhibition, organized by these fantastic curators, is the stage for the play that I made in Mexico City, maybe 7 years ago already, I don't remember. And I'm very, very proud to be part of this show, because, I mean, we organize these presentations, these performances in the gallery, and at a very high expense, which became kind of a contradiction for my practice, using only recycled objects. And so, in this case, it meant to produce properly a big project, and hiring actors, and planning, like lighting and sound and so. And so at the end, I think it's something that we cannot experience again, but if not at a high expense. But instead, we have the stage as a sculptural vestige, let's say, of something that can give evidence of this collaborative project. Also, it's important for me because I asked some colleagues, artists from abroad, not only from Mexico, like from Lima in Peru, Glasgow in Scotland, Argentinian artists, artists from the US as well, to give proposals for props for the stage. So we got 20 different proposals that we used during the performance by the actors. And so when you enter this sculpture in the exhibition home, you become the new actor of this. And this is very important for me as well. So you create the work. I mean, it makes sense when it's inhabited, as it was during the exhibition. Of course, there is some music that we are not listening to now, but of course, you can listen to it if you take some 5 minutes to sit there and you wear the headset, as there is a monitor with this video recording in the installation. And so that's it. I collaborated also with some friends, not only the actors, all of them are friends of mine, as the artists who proposed the props, but also the scene director, you know, a proper theater director, and a composer. We worked like improvising, as I do all the time, as I'm doing now. And I just made a collection of things, like things from here and there, and we gave them to the actors, and they started improvising with the objects. We made videos of all of them, these improvising moments, separately, let's say individually, then in couples, and then the four of them together, and then exchanging couples. And then we selected moments to make a script for the play. So it's set as a script, it's fixed, let's say. Then the composer was there watching all these improvising experiments, and he created the score for the play while watching to these improvising moments. And so that's a very generous thing that I wanted to be analogous, coherent, consistent with my own personal experience and story and tale. So that's it. Thank you very much.